Hello, my name is David Osborne, the Secondary Methods of Administration Coordinator here at the Illinois State Board of Education. Thank you so much for viewing this information to learn a little bit more about our civil rights review process. This is a process in which we are reviewing for compliance with educational equity legislation within our school districts that are offering CTE programs. So I appreciate you taking some time to learn more about our process and how that works out. So first, once again, just to recap, purpose of the methods of administration civil rights reviews are to ensure access and equity within career and technical education programs, and also to eliminate discrimination and denial of services on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, and handicap. That was the original language. Obviously, we now use the updated language for disability. But this is coming straight from the MOA guidelines released in 1979. So in response to the 1979 Vocational Education Programs Guidelines for Eliminating Discrimination and Denial of Services on the basis of the following categories, uh, states developed plans that were then submitted to the U.S. Department of Education and the Office of Civil Rights in order to ensure that there were no denial of services based off of race, color, national origin, sex, handicap, or disability. Some of the laws that we look at while conducting these reviews are specifically laid out in those guidelines and also referenced in updates to those guidelines. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, prohibiting discrimination based on race, color, and national origin. Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Title II of the American with Disabilities Act of 1990. And the authority for these reviews stems from the vocational educational guidelines for eliminating discrimination and denial of services on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, and handicap from 1979. So first, just an overview of how schools are identified for the reviews. As a result of the state's plan submission, ISB reviews secondary schools and ICCB reviews post-secondary community colleges through each agency's separate risk assessments. The risk assessment for secondary schools includes all schools that receive federal Perkins funds for CT programs. So that is what we call our MOA universe of recipients that we can conduct reviews on. Our specific risk assessment is based on disparities and gaps in CTE participation among the applicable subgroups. And so we conduct a data review of the participation rates compared to total population um, to make a determination on identifying risk. How are schools notified of the review? So as far as notifying each school, ISB sends out both an email and a uh, U.S. mail letter to notify the superintendent of the upcoming review. Um, Additional information can be found at our website, isb.net, Civil Rights Secondary Ed. It is listed there. Um, as far as how many schools we're reviewing each year, that would be approximately 15. Each year are identified for review. And so what happens once a school is notified of participation in this process? So once a school does receive notice of this, um, one thing to keep in mind is that this is not identified, the school is not, or district was not identified um, due to any complaint. This was a part of a risk assessment, and it is not the result of something that the school has done wrong. Um, it is just a part of a risk assessment to look at the CT participation rates. Districts will be given access to an IWA system that allows for the required evidence to be uploaded directly into the system. And some more information on what some of that required Evidences can be found at the link there, illequity.com/forms resource. Um, and schools are also asked to appoint a contact person, and this will be the person that uh, ISB contacts in order to schedule a date for when the review will be conducted. Typically, the letter of notification provides a suggested date, but it is negotiable and can be rescheduled if in the event of a conflict of schedule. So the MOA review is broken down into a few different parts. Um, there's the interview with stakeholders. Usually this includes central office administration, building administration. We meet with CT teaching staff, Section 504 building coordinator, the special education coordinator, um, teacher, builder, teacher or building coordinator, school counselors, CTE students, and then anyone else that might be involved in equity as far as a Title IX coordinator. But these are all groups that we meet with. It's we usually break it down into about five different groups, five different sessions of interviews where we meet and discuss some of the questions that might pertain to methods of administration. So as far as what is happening exactly during the review, that was just one step uh, in really three steps. So a document review is included where the coordinator, myself, and some additional ISB staff look at some of the documents that are submitted as part of the required evidence, but also review the district's website for compliance, handbooks, things of that nature to ensure that um, federal legislation is being met. There's also a physical facility review where we are looking for accessibility for individuals with disabilities, ensuring that comparable facilities are provided pertaining to Title IX. So this is going to be a visit to the school, a lot of time spent looking at the facilities to ensure that everything is meeting all of the required codes and requirements for instance, for the American Disabilities Act. Each part is often conducted on separate days and typically requires no longer than 2 days of school collaboration. So typically those 2 days are going to be the facility physical accessibility review and then the desk review or interviews. Those are going to be the two parts that will definitely require some more school collaboration to schedule those. As far as the document review, we do look at the enrollment. We look at student race, ethnicity, sex, disability, demographics, looking at the admission requirements and programming, also looking at website information, staff demographics, policy and procedure manuals, to ensure that each of these are aligning to those federal pieces of federal legislation mentioned at the beginning of this video. Just a quick overview of what the process looks like. Um, After we have completed the review, within 60 days of that on-site facility review, you should be receiving what's called a letter of finding. And each school will receive it, whether or not there are findings identified or not. These letters of finding include a summary of the review for each of our 8 components, and then also it will issue whether or not there is a uh, required corrective action um, or not, and it also will provide recommendations as applicable. One thing to keep in mind is this can be contested, but voluntary compliance plans do have to be created and submitted within 45 days after receiving the letter of finding. Voluntary compliance plan, just to clarify, It is not voluntary whether you create the plan. The intention behind the voluntary compliance plan is that districts have flexibility on how they go about meeting those requirements, and that is the voluntary part of it. Uh, Plans of corrective action developed in response to the letter of finding. And once again, these are due 45 days after you receive that letter of finding. Approval of voluntary compliance plans is typically determined by ISB within 90 days of receiving the VCP. There may be some negotiation as far as the timelines um, for those VCPs, and we can get to that in just a moment. But verification of corrective action is the next step in that. We spend some time. Once again, the timeline for completing these corrective actions should not extend past 2 years, and but some should be completed much sooner. Uh, Finalized LOFs and VCPs are submitted to the U.S. Department of Education every 2 years through our biennial reports. So these do go to the Office of Civil Rights. So as far as letters of finding, once again, we will be drafting those and sending those out. They will be distributed through the Iowa system, but also mailed out as well. The LOF should include findings and recommendation. It could include findings and recommendations, and it covers each of these 8 areas: administrative requirements, recruitment, admissions and counseling, accessibility, comparable facilities, services for students with disabilities, financial assistance, work study, cooperative programs, and job placement and employment. So uh, school districts should review and respond to the draft LOF and notify ISB within 14 days if they wish to dispute a finding. Um, Once accepted, districts should develop a voluntary compliance plan using the Iowa system. So that brings us to that next step of developing that voluntary compliance plan. Plans should be submitted through the Iowa system within 45 days and must address each area of noncompliance detailed in the letter of finding. These are all going to be automatically populated over in the Iowa system so that it makes it a little bit easier. As far as what must be included, it will automatically populate that the finding, but it does require districts to enter, planned corrective action, how they're going to go about addressing these. The timeline for completion, which must at the minimum include a month and a year. The person responsible for that, and then the method of verification should also be included as well. It could include submitting photographs for some of those physical reviews. Could be submitting the updated student handbooks as required. So these are just some of the ways that a district can go about providing evidence of completion of these corrective actions. Um, Once again, districts must complete all corrective actions within 2 years, but some of those findings should be addressed in much less time. So, for instance, if it's something that does not require uh, in, in, uh, extensive investment of time or money or resources, obviously those should be completed in a reasonable timeline. And then once we receive, ISB will review and provide notification of approval to the districts of their voluntary compliance plan. Step 3 of this process, following an on-site review, is going to be the monitoring. So upon acceptance of the VCP, ISB shall begin the monitoring process. School districts will be able to submit verification of evidence to ISB for review through the Iowa system, and the ISB representative is able to approve each pieces of that evidence or disapprove if additional information is needed. Letter of closure. Upon receipt of the documentation that supports the successful completion of the entire VCP, a letter of closure of the civil rights review will be sent to the district superintendent. After that, uh, the process will be completed for that school district. The only next steps are ISB does submit a biannual report that includes that letter of finding and the voluntary compliance plan every 2 years to the Office of Civil Rights. Um, but beyond that, that is the end of the process. Once again, one thing to keep in mind is that we are here to support you through this process. If you do have any questions, please email us at moa@isb.net or call 217-524-4832. Once again, my name is David Osborne, and I am the Secondary Methods of Administration Coordinator. I appreciate you taking the time to view this information, and please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.